Well, my friends, this is the Fat Man. We're going to revisit the next installment of the space opera game system that came off my shelf. This is StarSetor Atlas 11, the Confederate Systems Alliance. This particular atlas is, the history is these are made up. Hello, my friend is trying to help. She's trying to help. She's just a bit nosy. The humans discovered in this particular case were still fleeing from an extremely oppressive Terran government and discovered a ancient Stargate device floating in the asteroid belt. And using it over a couple decades, I think close to a century of careful use, the support from a number of corporations and wealthy individuals, they were able to use the device to flee the star system into this section of the nearby galaxy, this particular sector, and it was able to explore and colonize quite a few planets. The government, or the lack thereof at the time, these people were fleeing from government, so they chose to be independent from each other, pretty much not have any kind of organized military or defense other than trade. They really were ill-prepared for their first encounter with a truly starfaring advanced race. The Korellians, or Korells, depending how you want to pronounce it, that's with a K, kind of reminiscent of the Klingons. It's I don't want to say it's a knockoff of the Klingons, but even their pictures kind of vaguely have a Klingonish look about them. The particular alien race were highly aggressive, believed in conquering and subjugating every individual, every species they come across, every planet they encounter. They ran into the human colonists of this particular neck of the woods, and the humans were, except for a few occasional outposts or colonies that were better defended than others, really didn't have a whole lot of options to prevent what came next. The Korells are notorious for using blunt force whenever possible to curtail things like disobedience and uprisings and so on and so forth. So these humans discovered themselves under the bootjacks of an alien species, and they were a long way from help in Earth. And of course, they knew that they couldn't turn to the Terran Federation because the so-called High Republic, or whatever the era, was not gonna do nothing other than chastise them for running away. And they were, as far as the Terrans were concerned, these people were traitors and terrorists and worse, because they ran away and decided not to live under the control. They had a pure Earth, where they immediately began to canvass secretly potential colonists, and they hit a bigger jackpot than they ever could imagine. Not only were many minority groups on Earth ready to die to be in such a project, but they found themselves approached by several large Terran-based multinational companies who wanted nothing more than to rid themselves of the pure Earth's leeches, who battened onto practically every millicredit in their profits in the name of the people. With the resources of manpower provided by the various minority groups, the economic help and participation of multinationals, the space expertise of all 5 lunar colonies, Project Exodus worked smoothly for over 10 years, during which time over 20 million people, mostly in cold sleep, hundreds of billions of credits worth of equipment were shipped out to new worlds of the CSA region. So, there's how they got there. Now, this particular region of space is still in the timeline of space opera's game world, is still under the control of the Korells. That is soon to change. The Korellian, 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 not Korellian as in Han Solo's people, but the Korellians, the Korells. If you think about what ancient Rome did to a lot of its provinces, it maintained significant amount of forces to control the outer provinces, but they also allowed numerous members of their population to settle. go out and lay claims and take up administrative positions and positions of influence in the regions. And the veterans that were mustering out of the service were granted lands, which gave them a dual edge ability, being that they now had a cadre of well-trained, veteran, disciplined legionnaires to help protect the Roman interests in these far-flung lands, but they also had these people who were going to influence and subjugate the locals into doing what the Rome wanted. This is what the Korellians are doing, more or less, to the humans and other aliens living in the CSA sector. Now, early on, there were several attempted uprisings that were brutally put down in the typical Korell fashion. This led to this coalition or alliance, and they got these various member worlds or individual worlds sent leaders and resources and started developing a well thought out plan to overthrow the Korell influence once and for all. And they decided to do it and take their time doing it. So it wasn't something they were going to rush into. This whole section here deals with that particular thing. And despite the quite reasonable precautions, the Korellian military had not taken into account the tenacity of human underground guerrillas. After only 20 years of civil rule, they were ready for a second attempt at acquiring their independence, which failed. And so when they come back for a third try, they failed and failed spectacularly. So this time the Imperial reaction was swift, and the rebellion commonly referred to as the 300 days. The length of time from the initial uprising to the final crushing of the last resistance actually took 307 days, but historians always lose out to popular tradition. The aftermath of this rebellion was more severe than the first one. 95 million people throughout the sector were immediately executed, including all rebel soldiers and administrators, all their relatives unto the 7th generation as the emperor's orders went, and all those suspected of pro-rebel sympathies. These executions were followed by the arrest and deportation of a specially prepared penal settlement on Uller. A further 274 million humans were thought worthy of re-education and era of supporting the rebel cause. So, this forced the surviving leaderships and members of the so-called alliance to rethink their process. This time they decided to take even longer view, and they spent better part of the last 200 years developing and preparing. Now I rephrase it, 114 years of preparing for the next big one. This time they want to make sure that everything's going to work out. And in the process, they're taking I think the authors took a note from the Tet Offensive that the Vietnamese tried to pull, and had they had more resources, it was actually a pretty well thought out, well developed plan. Unfortunately, because of political reasons and a lack of really good leadership and resolve and supply issues, it fell apart. Tet Offensive was just a really good idea, really well executed, but with no real hope of success in the long term. The problem they're following that same kind of line, and in this case, they're planning for it to succeed. So they're infiltrating Korell bases and getting close to key government and military figures and so on and so forth, with the intentions of this all going up at once, of shutting as many of these bases down or disabling them, knocking off or just killing as many of the high command, the Korell high command and the civil authority as they can at one time, to help cut the head off the beast, so to speak. And then, with luck, they can get reinforced. They can hold out long enough to get appeal for United Federation of Planets and other human-led empires in space to come assist them to help keep them free. If that's going to work, don't know. But the timeline is so that when your players become involved in this region, they just arrived right before this all goes up. So everything goes to Huey, and they find themselves in the middle of it, potentially. Now, this booklet is intended to furnish the fullest information possible on the star sectors involved in this conflict, both CSA and the few bordering Korellian worlds. Also covers Korellian CSA deployment in the area. CSA Armed Forces make up an organization, a brief description of Korell Armed Forces. These will be dealt with in the later Star Atlas in more detail, which is Atlas number 12, which I do have, and we'll get to here in another week or so. And then, of course, the rest of it's pretty much planetary bios of individual planets and systems and some of the diverse cultures that inhabit this particular sector of space and how they're going to work together. Many of them have set aside their personal and political and religious differences to work to eliminate the common foe, so to speak. But it also sets the ground for immediate problems after that. Once the Korells are supposedly removed from the problem from the picture, then the various dispersed elements of this quote alliance is going to break loose, and then you know how that's probably going to end up. Or maybe, as a GM, you'll have a different would have a different take or twist on it. So we have a lot of good information in here, a lot of viable stuff. One of the things that this particular source book adds to it is a larger section of animal and creatures that I don't see in other source books. Not that they're not there, it's just that this one has a larger quantity of them for some reason. And then we have various government and both the Korells and the CSA organizations, equipment, some additional odds and ends that they added that might be of interest. Confederate Systems, Alliance Military, things like armored suits, war bots, that kind of stuff. There you go. Now, like I said, each Star Atlas is significantly different from each other. There's a different flavor and taste to it. They're written by the same two fellows, as best I can say, with the exception of the brand new ones coming out by Mr. Price. Not necessarily all of them are the same people, but there's a different flair. And there's a paragraph in one of the books that talks about how not all of them were intended for the same game universe, the same game world, so to speak, and that the Star Master should take that into account and adjust them accordingly if they're going to play them in their campaign world, to utilize them in whatever means they feel necessary. So there you have StarSetor Atlas 11 on my shaky table. Gotta love an RV. Everything's shaky.